I can feel individual compassion and sympathy for the women and children in the big house on the plantation. But I am always going to root for Nat Turner and the people with him. I can
Mm.
feel individual compassion for the white women and children, uh, settlers or homesteaders, as they were called, who were scalped. But I will always root for for indigenous warriors. I will always root for Crazy Horse and Chief Sitting Bull because I know who the victims are. And I know that these people, while they perceive themselves as innocent, and in some ways they themselves may be victims of a system that's using them for imperial expansion, they are not innocent. um, it doesn't mean they have to die, but the innocence that is always ascribed to Israelis, um, is just one of the dehumanizing factors against Palestinians, because we are never allowed to be, not even our babies are innocent. Everything we go through, no matter how horrific, no matter how barbaric, no matter how much we bleed, no matter how much we try to conform to the way that they need us to be, we are never innocent. And everything they do to us is justified, or it's blamed on us. So I refuse. And if you look, for example, US media was celebrating this pager attack on 4,000 people simultaneously. Because why? Because the vast majority of those pagers, according to them, belonged to Hezbollah, members of Hezbollah. It didn't matter that they were in their homes or that they were in shopping malls or in markets, or driving their cars, whatever. Their mere association with a resistance organization made them and everybody around them guilty. And yet, every single person at that Nova Festival, by virtue of their age, was either an active duty military soldier or a
Mm.
reservist. Every single one. And yet, nobody ever talks of them as being legitimate targets. Nobody questions their innocence. They are always referred to as civilians, even though they're not.
That's
These are
oh,
also the same. Everybody who lives around Gaza is a colonizer. And in fact, every single one of these kibbutzes is located on a former Palestinian village that belongs to people who live in Gaza. All of these people are also they're the same people who would sit on the hilltops surrounding Gaza, bring their sofas and popcorn, and watch as Israel bombed and set Gaza on fire in their mowing the lawn campaigns. So, and again, this doesn't mean they need to die, but I reject this absolute innocence that's always ascribed to the people who, they know they're if I live in an area that requires military protection, and it's across from a concentration camp, and I'm bringing my kids to that place, I mean, I bear some responsibility. I'm not going to a place like that.
mm. Susan, talk to me a little bit about Palestinian resistance throughout these different eras. Another thing that I found somewhat troubling is when people hear Palestinian resistance, they only hear Hamas or even just the PLO, again, both of which are legitimate resistance and liberation organizations. But there's also the Great March of Return. There's also general strikes. I mean, there's just been so many forms of Palestinian resistance throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
none of which seem to change the West's response, and certainly not Israel's response. Sort of, what's that like to sort of, one, to think about those different types of resistance, but also to find that none of it seems to work.
Well, right, and nobody knows about it because the only time they ever hear about us is when Israelis are harmed. Um, right, like prior to the formation of the PLO, from 1948 until the 1960s, the late 60s, Palestinians weren't quiet. We were going from one court to another, from one country to another, pleading our case, going through whatever procedures people asked us to do. Nobody even knew we existed, and it was only when Palestinians started hijacking planes and engaging in guerrilla warfare that the world even deigned to admit we existed. And then there was this whole several decades later that where Israel just continued this barbaric colonization, imperialism by the inch is what I call it. The daily grind of land theft, of home demolitions, of night raids, of checkpoints, and all of that, and deaths and murders, constant, and administrative detention and imprisonment, and all of that goes unnoticed until there's the first Intifada, which was largely nonviolent. I mean, the worst that Palestinians did were these like ninja nails that they threw in the streets to bust up their tires of their vehicles, and then so that then they take notice, and then that movement, that popular uprising, is then subdued with the Oslo Accords, which, just like these endless ceasefire negotiations, they were meant just to buy time so Israel could continue what it wants to do, which is to continue trying to obliterate us, trying to destroy us, and to acquire more land and more resources. And this is not, it's just not complicated. It's the oldest story in the book. And going back to Nat Turner, this is another narrative of a people who think that God loves them more, who think that they arrive with providence and divine entitlement to take, to loot, to destroy, to kill, because they are better, they are more civilized, they are more loved by God, they have providence. I mean, it's just, and then if when the natives actually protest or fight back, we are savages, we are terrorists, and so the story goes. But what's so shocking is that this is happening in the 21st century, and in an era that purports to, in a world order rather, that purports to value international law and human rights, and democratic ideals and whatnot. And so in that way, Israel is a complete anachronism, and there's no way to reconcile their existence with everything that the West claims to uphold. And so there's this clash, and the media is playing the most important role of bridging that gap by lying and spinning and dehumanizing us, and creating this aura of innocence and self-defense around Israel.